Who won the NFL offseason? I'm Gabe with Franchise Tag. This is my co-host Elijah, and today
Howdy, howdy.
we're going to be looking at our favorite performances this NFL offseason. That's covering free agent signings, re-signings, people that teams let walk in some occasions, as well as obviously the draft as the biggest event of the offseason. We are through basically all of the player acquisition phases that the offseason goes through, so we can kind of pretty accurately judge who our favorites are. This is not who the best team in the offseason was. This is just our personal favorites more than anything else.
This is a personal who won, not a, go spread it to all of the newspapers and, all of these draft grades and off-season grades. No. This is our opinion.
Vibe-based, no analytics involved. Thank you very much. Alrighty, I'll kick us off. The first team I want to talk about is the Houston Texans. They were really good last season and were not expected to be very good last season. And they kind of doubled down this year and just said, all right, we were good. We can continue to be good. Let's go beef up our team and just be really good. So their key additions were Stephon Diggs, Danielle Hunter, Joe Mixon, Sebastian Joseph-Day, and Danico Autry. Those last two just shored up that interior defensive line because they did lose Sheldon Rankins, and then they also lost Jonathan Grenard, which is why they signed Danielle Hunter. And then Diggs is just another weapon for the ever-talented CJ Stroud. They also re-signed Dalton Schultz and Noah Brown, so keeping those weapons around Stroud. And then two of my favorite draft picks of theirs were Kamari Lassiter, which was their first pick after they traded that pick to the Vikings, and then Cade Stover, which was the pick that Sketch announced. So shout out Sketch. And then the other little note I have about their draft is that they have a second round pick from the Vikings in this upcoming draft. And they also have those two players, and as well as the other players they drafted. I just didn't go into huge analytics on those.
Yeah, they made a huge splash with the Stephon Diggs trade late in the whole offseason process. Mm-hmm. But Danielle Hunter was a very good pickup. Joe Mixon, I feel, has been kind of up and down with whether he's overrated or properly rated, just given on whatever week the Bengals were playing. And then Sebastian Joseph-Day, I personally have just liked since his Ram days. And, it's a very solid adding on to what they already had established this past season with, the electric rookie of the season that CJ Stroud had.
Yeah, the other thing with Joe Mixon, they traded a 7th round pick for him. So they traded nothing for him. And they also, I didn't list it in the players that they let walk, but they lost Devin Singletary, who was, pretty decent as far as Devin Singletaries go. And they replaced him with Joe Mixon, who was a pretty important part of the Bengals' success. I don't think he gets the credit he deserves for being an orchestrator of that offense. Yeah,
for sure. And he was a huge part of the run game there. And speaking on run games, I'm going to be transitioning to one of my favorites here, and that is the Chargers. Clearly a team that is going to be prioritizing that run game given their draft additions, but just a quick recap. Another thing is the players they lost. Sometimes you lose players and it's a deficit to your team, and sometimes you lose players and it was a necessary evil that needed to be done. I think that's partly true for the Bills and Stephon Diggs. That cap hit, the issues with Diggs in the locker room, supposedly. But I think it's more so true here with Mike Williams, who gets cut from the team because he is owed a lot of money, and he missed 18 games in the past 2 years. And then the trading of Keenan Allen, who in the past 2 years missed 11 games. And I remember during the season there was stats going around the last time Keenan and Mike Williams were both healthy on the field was forever ago. You combine those two losses, which actually save you a lot of money. They're intelligent moves while not more so making you better. And then you couple that with the draft, which I loved their draft, with the addition of Joe Alt, really shoring up both tackles for Justin Herbert. And Ladd McConkey I liked. Junior Colson I liked. And then you add in Brendan Rice, who I don't know a whole lot about, but the legacy, the lineage, and just, he did play good. And then you add Cornelius Johnson, and I think really this entire draft is like, okay, how can we have the most Jim Harbaugh draft imaginable? And they hit all of those levels. They got two guys who he's already familiar with, that he's aware of how they are in a locker room. He's trying to build a culture up, so he wants to bring people in who are going to reflect that culture. And then you get Joe Alt, and you're going to be able to just drive the ball down people, like down the field. Because, I mean, if you want to make the argument of like, well, they needed to get a wide receiver because, look, they lost Williams and they lost Keenan Allen. But also, they've been losing Keenan Allen and Mike Williams the past 2 years. They've been playing with those wide receiver 3s and 4s, stepping up in these roles. So who's to say that they can't do it again while also infusing a lot more wide receiver talent into the room? And that's personally my favorite part of the draft for them.
Yeah. To that point, I think that the games where they were missing Mike Williams and Keenan Allen, they struggled a lot from it. So I think that it's not like the people saying that they should draft a receiver, myself included. I don't think it was as much of like you lost these guys, so you need to pick up a new receiver. It was the same camp that was advocating for them drafting Quentin Johnston last year, who obviously hasn't panned out so far. But if he turns things around and becomes a good receiver, they drafted him because they kept losing Mike Williams and Keenan Allen, and they were both injury-prone older receivers who had high cap hits, so future-proofing is good. And drafting another receiver to go alongside Quentin Johnston so that your number one isn't somebody who has massive drop issues and massive just performance issues, I think would have been a better option for them. But I also think that when Harbaugh was first signed to that head coaching role there, everybody was saying Justin Herbert is going to do less this year than he ever has before, and he's going to get praised more for it than he ever has before. And I think that rings true here with their kind of, they're moving towards that ground and pound offense. They added Gus Williams, right?
Yep. Edwards, but
yeah. Who the fuck is Gus Williams? They added Gus Edwards. They added Joe Alt, obviously, and shored up that offensive line, even though it was already pretty good.
Yeah.
So they just added to their strengths instead of fixing their weaknesses. And whether or not that's a good thing, only time will tell.
Yep.
We can transition into my next team, which is my personal team, the Patriots. Free agent additions, we had Jacoby Brissett, Chukwuma Okorafor, and Antonio Gibson. We, as you were saying, with some players that maybe lost isn't the right term for them. So I've gone ahead and titled this "Got Rid of," and that is Mac Jones, J.C. Jackson, and Devontae Parker. It was a necessary evil, and Juju is hopefully the next name on the list. And then we re-signed Kyle Duggar, Mike Onwenu, Josh Uche, and Kendrick Bourne, who are four really talented players and really bright spots on a team that obviously picking third was not that good. Onwenu is a really good guard who can also play tackle, but was playing tackle last year after not practicing for it during the offseason. So this offseason, he's going to have a full cycle to transition to tackle. Kendrick Bourne is solid. He's just shoddy QB play, and he's a good option. And then Josh Uche is on a really, really team-friendly deal. I think it was like 1 year, $3 million or something like that. Like he turned down bigger offers to go back to New England on what I would assume is a prove-it type deal. Duggar's really good. And then obviously the draft. I loved the Patriots draft, and I feel like a lot of people didn't. But they drafted Drake May, obviously, third overall. Then they got Jalen Polk, Javon Baker, and Jaheim Bell as my kind of favorite picks. They also got Joe Milton. Okay, he's cool. He can throw the ball far, but I'm not like that pick doesn't move me like the other ones do. And you know, whether or not these picks pan out, I've said it throughout this process, whether or not, you know, Jalen Polk is actually a really good receiver and whether or not Javon Baker makes a difference. We drafted our needs and we drafted players that were well known and well respected at these positions rather than drafting a third round guard in the first round or, you know, taking N'Keal Harry over AJ Brown and, DK Metcalf, and like just all these questionable decisions. And this year is the first year that I've kind of felt like, well, we might actually be in a new regime and turning things around. And so I'm really happy with how their entire offseason has turned out, even though it's not graded super highly by most people.
Yeah, I feel like, you know, we've talked about it a lot because of the Patriots being your team, but they certainly didn't get the praise of other teams. And I think that it's kind of, it's a turn of an era with Belichick being out of there. So do you want to make a huge splash and then that kind of all just crumble apart, or do you want to slowly build and add momentum and add these pieces? I think this was more so of that slow build, but they did it in a good way. They retained the highlights, and they added enough new pieces to make an impact without fully like, oh, we're going to go out and we're going to make kind of how Belichick did at the end of that era when Brady was gone, and they spent all of that money just to kind of end up here again a few years down the line. So I think that they're kind of trying to learn from that mistake that they just made a few years back.
Yeah, definitely.
And next up on my favorites list here, I have the Bears. They're a division rival, but it's hard to say that they did anything wrong this free agency, this draft. We, of course, were in the boat of Justin Fields, but he ended up getting traded away after they made these moves to really shore up the perfect situation for a rookie quarterback to enter. Coaching is a little finicky there, but this is pure like off-season, the player acquisition period. You trade for Keenan Allen, who, as I mentioned, he's been injured, and he was a huge cap issue for the team that I just talked about. But as a wide receiver room that now has Keenan Allen, they got DJ Moore the season prior, and you go ahead and we fast forward to the draft, they're also adding Rome Odunze into that group. So you have probably one of the best trios if Rome Odunze is as hyped up as he matches his hype, I guess, if he just lives up to that hype. You have that going for you. Also, they re-signed Jalen Johnson, which was one of my, I wanted Jalen Johnson to hit the market so the Lions could get him, but I'm very, I love Jalen Johnson as a player. He's very great, so their retaining of him is a major plus for them. DeAndre Swift, who's he resurged last season. He's going to be able to further aid this team as their run game wasn't their strongest. More so, I'd say, coaching-wise last season. But they added a lot of good pieces along with Gerald Everett again, another tight end behind Cole Kmet. So the offense got a huge bolster. You re-signed Jalen Johnson, and they're coming off of the end of the year where after they got Montez Sweat, they were a way different defense that was a lot more effective. So you're doing all of this to prepare Caleb Williams into this role, and it's hard to say that this isn't one of the best draft free agent combos in preparation for his rookie year.
Yeah, I think that when I think about a lot of the Bears' issues last season, or their worst plays, their lowlights, if you will, it's Velus Jones touching the field, and it's Robert Tonyan touching the field. And they've fixed that by drafting Rome Odunze and adding Keenan Allen, and then also getting Gerald Everett, which I think is a really underrated addition because in that offense that they were running last year, Robert Tonyan was on the field. He was going down the field and dropping passes that hit him in the hands. And whether or not, I'm a little salty for Justin Fields, it ultimately doesn't matter. He's moved on and he's no longer going to be their quarterback, and that's fine. I think that Caleb Williams is a better quarterback than Justin Fields, and I don't think it's that crazy to say it. And I think that the only thing that I was hoping Justin Fields would stick around for is just to see what would happen, because I feel like now his career is kind of in that
purgatory.
Like where his confidence is now down because he was shipped off for a 6th round pick and doesn't have a starting job and isn't in the best of situations with Arthur Smith as his OC. And like all of this stuff is just, it's just unfortunate. But yeah, the Bears crushed the offseason. They are poised to be one of the better teams in the NFC, and that's with a rookie quarterback at the helm. Their window is now. Like their window has opened now for a Super Bowl.
For sure. Yep.
And then getting into my final team, it is the Tennessee Titans, which, yeah, that face is about what I expected. I didn't tell them what my final team was going to be until right now. I'll get to everything eventually, but in free agency, they added L'Jarius Sneed, Calvin Ridley, and Tony Pollard, who, Is Pollard that good? Who knows? But they also have Ty Spears, who I think is a pretty good third down back and a pretty good option at running back. He was solid alongside Derrick Henry last year. And that'll transition me into their key losses of Derrick Henry, Ryan Tannehill, and Danico Autry, who I mentioned earlier with the Texans, because that's where he went. And then they got L'Jarius Sneed and they got Calvin Ridley, and they may have overpaid a little bit for Ridley, but ultimately, and I'll get to that a little later, ultimately I don't hate it. So they then went on and drafted J.C. Latham and Tavondre Sweat. Did they overpay Ridley? Yes. Did they overdraft J.C. Latham? Yes. But are they doing their best to build up a team around a rookie quarterback a young quarterback on a rookie deal to extend their window and kind of surround that QB with the older talent so that they can then surround an older QB with younger talent later? Absolutely. And I don't know if it'll work out, but that formula is what we have seen succeed in the past. And I think if they do succeed, that will be why. Not keeping around an aging Derrick Henry and not betting on some third, fourth, fifth round receivers to carry a second round quarterback to success.
Yeah, I think kind of the downside that I mentioned for the Bears where coaching was an issue, that we don't know how it's going to pan out. They did a similar thing. The Titans, they ousted their head coach. They brought in a more vertical, offensive-minded head coach, less of a pound the ball down their throat with Derrick Henry every other play. So the way that they, went about this offseason was like, okay, we're moving away from that. And so, yeah, they needed to add Ridley because they needed another wide receiver option. Yes, they have an old wide receiver room, a lot of veterans in it, but these are the kind of things that they need to do in the meanwhile to be competitive for this year, so they can kind of instill that new scheme. And then, okay, next season we'll draft a wide receiver because we saw these issues prop up with our wide receivers, or we're going to let this one walk because aging out and he's not being as effective. It's kind of a Band-Aid year while still adding enough things to help Mayo Man develop and to still be competitive in their division, which has gotten a lot more competitive around them these past few years.
I also think one of the things that is downplayed the most is the development of young quarterbacks. And if you can successfully develop a young quarterback and get him to the point where he is a Josh Allen type, like a legit game-changing type of quarterback, it doesn't matter as much the weapons you put around him. So paying Calvin Ridley a fuck ton of money, for lack of a better word, for a couple years of decent receiver play, if that ultimately helps Will Levis develop into a franchise quarterback, it doesn't matter what they paid him because he helped Levis develop, and then Levis will elevate talent around him. So ultimately, we won't know if this is a good decision until like 3-4 years in the future when Levis is up for a new contract and any number of other things have happened or have not happened for them.
Yeah. And transitioning into the final of our three favorites, my final favorite here is, he got to do it, so why not me? I'm going to throw in the Lions into the fray, and we have some honorable mentions coming up a little later, but the Lions here, I really like the addition of DJ Reader. I thought that he was great for the Bengals. He was a great interior defensive presence there, and being able to add him to the team is a massive plus here. Anyone who's listened to the podcast this past season knows that their Lions defense was very abysmal throughout the year. So adding a body to the interior D-line, who I won't say that I'm, upset with our interior D-line play. Isaiah Buggs, great name, great player to kind of see anytime he had a flash play, but it wasn't often when we saw those. So DJ Reader, who's more likely to have those big TFLs, I'm very happy to see step into that role. We also added Carlton Davis, and Carlton Davis is one of those like veteran. He's a good corner, and good corners were something that we were very much lacking with. No diss to Kendall Vildor, but Kendall Vildor is a player who should not be your starting boundary, and he should definitely be a little further down your depth chart. So I'm looking at the free agent additions there, and I'm like, okay, these are pretty good. I'm pretty happy with this. And then you add to that the draft, which I'm very much a fan of the early days of the draft, but the later days of the draft, I know next to not much about all of those players. I know Sion Vaki was a two-way player, and I know one of them's from British Columbia, and I know Christian Mahogany was slept on and slipped in the draft to a lot of draft analysts' dismay. So I can value all of those in their own right, but I don't personally have much interest in that. I do, however, have a lot of personal interest in Terrion Arnold and Ennis Rakestraw, who we already made one addition to the corner room, but as I said, okay, we're moving Kendall Vildor down one spot on the depth chart. How about we instead move him down 3 because we're adding such a competitive group into that DB room? It's definitely not my favorite Lions draft of the past few years. And it mostly because of that lack of knowledge on those later round players. But I think the additions in the free agent period definitely help make this a team, make this a group that I can say, yeah, they were one of my favorites for this off-season period.
Yeah. I like, without a bias of being a fan of the Lions, I looked at their draft and their offseason and I was like, some solid moves. And then we got news today that they just extended Jared Goff 4 years, $212 million. And whether or not that's a little bit of an overpay, if it ends in a Super Bowl, doesn't ultimately matter. That's kind of the, speaking of Jared Goff, that's the mentality that Rams fans and I think just NFL fans in general have with the Matt Stafford trade. Did they send a couple firsts? Yeah. Did they send a decent quarterback who's turned into a franchise quarterback? Yeah. But they got a ring out of it, so it doesn't matter. Yeah. They got their ultimate goal, and that is the end of it. You can't say that they lost the trade or that anything bad happened because they got a ring.
Then we can kind of get through these, honorable mentions a little quicker than we got through our main ones here. But I will kick us off with the Commanders. Obviously, drafting Jaden Daniels and Johnny Newton and Mike Sainristil.
And Luke McCaffrey.
Really good draft in mine. And Luke McCaffrey, I wasn't going to say that in the same breath because I don't see him as, those three.
Your bias for Michigan guys is what has Sainristil in that group, because he was also kind of in that Luke McCaffrey tier, I think, closer to that than Jaden Daniels and Johnny Newton.
Yes, it is. It's the personal, Johnny Newton and Jaden Daniels are there, but I think Luke McCaffrey is separated from Mike Sainristil still. So, it is that personal Michigan bias on Sainristil being there, because I got to actually see Sainristil, whereas Luke McCaffrey I've seen highlights of. Yeah. And I didn't get to deep dive any of that. But outside of that, they also added Bobby Wagner, and I think that their additions to the offensive line with Tyler, I can't ever say his name right, Biadasz, there, thank you. They're certainly making an effort to get better, and I think that's something that they haven't done in a while. So ever since they dropped the Redskins from their name, I don't think they have been super competitive or super eager to be competitive, and this feels like a step in that direction, at least.
Yeah. The only thing that scares me is Jaden Daniels and RG3's like mirror careers so far, of just like a little bit undersized, kind of injury prone, went second overall after a generational quarterback, and Andrew Luck in 2012, Caleb Williams in 2024. Will Jaden Daniels have a career damaging injury at the end of his rookie season? We hope not, right? We hope not. But anywho, we can get on to my first honorable mention, which I'm going to give to the Raiders, who I don't think will be that good this season, but with the problem that they're facing is not one that could have been solved at their position in the draft or in free agency, because their issue is at quarterback. And at their position in the draft at 13, 6 quarterbacks were off the board, and I don't think they wanted to reach on that 7th.
Yeah, Spencer Rattler, baby.
Yeah, first round quarterback. Anywho, their additions of Christian Wilkins and Gardner Minshew on a slightly lower level than Christian Wilkins, I think were good. And then they let Josh Jacobs and Jimmy Garoppolo walk. I don't think losing Josh Jacobs is that detrimental of a blow for them. I don't think it's a great thing to lose your leading rusher, but he ultimately wasn't that crazy good. I think his 1 year leading the NFL in rushing when like every running back was getting hurt, I think that kind of propelled him into that next level of like, maybe he is that good.
Yeah.
But ultimately I don't really think he is. And then they lost Jimmy Garoppolo. Great thing. Anytime you lose Jimmy Garoppolo, applause. Good job. And then their draft. I thought they did really well in the early days of the draft, getting Brock Bowers and Jackson Powers-Johnson, two guys who I was really high on. And, you know, drafting a tight end at 13, maybe it's not the best idea. But if you say that there is a better overall player available at 13 than Brock Bowers, you're lying to yourself and others, and you need to stop. So whether or not it actually pans out and leads to success, we don't know. But what they did, I think, was pretty good.
Definitely. And then I'm going to kick us off into my second honorable mention. It's more so honorable and less actually there due to what they ended up losing, but it is the Eagles. They ended up losing Jason Kelce to retirement, Fletcher Cox as well, and those are big veteran blows to this team. So while they did make a lot of moves this free agent and in the draft that I liked a lot, I think more like the pure talent acquisition was more so of like, okay, we just lost a whole lot, so we got to bring a lot in, less so in the same, position group, but more so as a team overall. So they did re-sign Landon Dickerson to shore him up. They signed Saquon. They got Bryce Huff. CJ Gardner-Johnson returned to their team from the Lions, and they drafted Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean. So, I mean, we were saying like, yeah, the secondary of the Eagles needs to change, needs to be fixed, similar to how I was saying that about the Lions, and now they go ahead and all right, we're going to yoink CJ back, and we're going to get Quinyon, and we're going to get Cooper DeJean, while also, okay, we lost DeAndre Swift, let's bring in Saquon to fill that void. They moved more laterally than I think other teams that I've had listed on this, on my actual top teams, on my favorites, but they did still move really well throughout this offseason period.
Yeah, I think that, we were saying get a new secondary, and they got, what's a standard secondary if you're running like a 3-4 or a 4-3? 4 guys? Yeah, they got 3 new guys for their secondary that are probably going to be starting. Quinyon Mitchell, very good player. Cooper DeJean, very good player. CJ very good player if he can stay healthy.
Yep.
But anyway.
And not wear blue ski masks.
We'll get into my second and final honorable mention. You've got 3, I've got 2, and that is the Ravens. They didn't really do a ton. And I think that kind of like the Eagles, their losses are what really hurt them. The only free agent addition that they made that was worth a ton, they did Chris Board, shout out. Your last name is Board, so I want one of your jerseys. But other than that, they added Derrick Henry, which a backfield with Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry. Good luck. And then they did lose Patrick Queen, Geno Stone, John Simpson, J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards. But Gus Edwards, J.K. Dobbins, mediocre running backs mediocre is the wrong word. They are specialty running backs. They succeeded
from this scheme.
No, they are specialty running backs. They are very good at a certain thing and not very good at other things. J.K. Dobbins, very elusive, not super fast, not super powerful, and very, very injury prone. Gus Edwards, very powerful. Put him on the goal line, give him the ball, he's getting a touchdown. But other than that, he's a little bit, his game is a little bit less nuanced. And they do have Keaton Mitchell on their roster, so I'll try to speed things up a little bit. And then through their draft, they got Nate Wiggins in the first round, Devontae Walker and TJ Tampa in the 4th, and then Adisa Isaac, I believe that was in the 3rd. And Tez Walker and TJ Tampa were 2 guys that I had seen, maybe early second, but definitely like some solid second round grades on. So to get them in the 4th, that's pretty good. Adisa Isaac is just a solid edge rusher out of Penn State, so that's a good pickup in the 3rd. And then Nate Wiggins falling to them at 30 is pretty big as well if he can stay healthy.
Yep. We had spoken on it already, but the TJ Tampa, their 4th round, you were a big fan of for them. We discussed it in another video. And then our final honorable mention here is the Colts. It's my honorable mention. I like their draft. Liatu Latu and Adonai Mitchell. I both got scouting report videos up on them. I was high on both of them. They got Liatu Latu late in the 1st, and then they got Adonai in the 2nd. Middle of the 1st.
Yeah.
They got Adonai in the 2nd round, which was, more of a slip than a lot of people had for Adonai Mitchell. And there was, reasons circulating for that. But the other part of this is the re-signing of Michael Pittman Jr. and Kenny Moore, who we both were. Michael Pittman less so, Kenny Moore more so. We wanted them to retain because if he were to leave, they were going to have a void to fill. Michael Pittman's, him retaining just means that Adonai Mitchell and the entire wide receiver room, with Anthony Richardson coming back, hopefully healthy for a full season, will be able to thrive a lot more than last season with Gardner Minshew and the wide receiver room that they had then.
Yeah, so, my desire for them to not keep Michael Pittman was purely my Patriots fanism in me wanting the Patriots to have a decent receiver option in free agency. So I will say that.
Bit biased on that, but yeah. Then keeping them definitely hurt you a little bit. So that can be a plus for them. But with that wraps up our favorite off seasons. Let us know if we didn't mention your team, and make your case down below on why we should put our ear to the ground and pay more attention to your team specifically. Outside of that, anything you want to add here?
Yeah, I was going to say, actually, let us know your favorite offseason by a team that isn't your team. Just so that there's not as much bias and offense taken if we disagree with you. Just look at some of the off seasons, look at the drafts, see who is not your favorite team, but a team that did pretty well. Let us know that as well if we didn't mention them already. And as always, leave your thoughts in the comments. We respond to everybody. So
that.
Yeah, all we got. Deuces.